I just think it's a crisis of faith. Like that's ultimately what's driving I think, a lot of these problems. I mean, when you are allowing predators to medicalize children who are autistic, anxious, or confused about their gender, when you're allowing surgeons to engage in surgeries on minors in an effort to change their sex, you're pretty far gone in a way as a society. You're pretty far gone. When you're going out there and chanting Black Lives Matter and how we support Black lives, and then you're demonizing the police, resulting in the police pulling back and emboldening homicides and seeing, the deaths of Black people from homicides increased by at least 3,000. When you're letting I discovered a young Black girl on the street, naked, psychotic, in a vulnerable situation in San Francisco, when you're allowing people to die in those ways, when you're sending the firefighters out to just revive people for the 12th or 20th time from a drug overdose, you're kind of far gone, like as a society. Like I can see the really dark view of it is that we've gone really far gone, and that liberalism didn't just didn't just fail to prevent these awful things, but it really enabled them and provided the justification, for, hey, well, people are going to want to, let people do their own thing. People want to do that, to their genitals. They want to smoke fentanyl and meth. That's fine. So liberalism, it's indicted by it. I think it has to deal with that. And that has been the conservative criticism of liberalism, and comes right out of Nietzsche, right? Where he says, if God is dead, then everything is permitted. Doesn't say everything is possible. It's not possible to change your sex, but everything is permitted. And so we're allowed to do these absolutely awful, gruesome experiments on vulnerable people, on mentally ill people, and the people that are least likely to protect themselves. And the people doing the experiments are liberals and progressives by their own definition. It's a hugely damning indictment of liberalism. The conservative remedy is to kind of go back to some religious basis of society. I don't even know what that would look like. I mean, obviously it hasn't worked. There's been Christian conservatives that have made the case for decades, but not everybody's Christian, and Christians disagree with Christians, and there's Jews and there's Hindus and there's atheists, and so you got to find a way to make civilization work for all these different groups of people. And so where I go to is just more like, let's just start by being pro-human and recognizing that we are very special, and that we don't have to, suggest that we have the right to wipe out all animals or something like that, but like humans are special, and we're humans, and we love ourselves, and we love our families, and we love each other. And if you're pro-human, then you're pro-civilization. And if you're pro-civilization, because that's how you protect human life, is with civilization. If you're pro-civilization, then you're for law and order, meritocracy, cheap energy, equal justice under the law, free speech, free enterprise, and I think a few other things. And that's, for me, a practical Gen Xer plus agenda that you could actually get a majority of people in the Western world to support, even in places like California and San Francisco.
I had a conversation with Peter Boghossian, and we went back and forth on this a bit. And one of the things that I don't know if this unlocked an empathy for the woke alternative dogma, but it occurred to me in talking to him that if you don't believe in a soul, in an ineffable, immaterial equality that underpins the dignity, it's a measuring stick that's outside of the material order.
Right.
And if you're saying, I am going to just try to observe the material order as it actually is, you said it, how do you go from an is to an ought?
Yeah.
Well, if you're just looking at the is, we are tribal.
Yes.
There is a certain zero-sum game battle in which the strong will win. And if there is no moral yardstick to say that winning in the wrong way is morally wrong,
right,
well then winning is just called evolution. It's the survival of the fittest. It's
right.
So it seems like the victimhood, the woke view that we are the product of a kind of material tribalism that cannot be, you can't abstract away from it. It is what it is. in the legal sense, I understand they basically say, no judge can be impartial. So throw that even as an ideal out the window. Ideals are irrelevant.
Right.
It's this postmodern, there is no real truth. There's just the truth of the reality of the power dynamics.
Right.
I mean, that does seem like a way to understand the world if all you've got to go on is material observation. If you are like looking at human existence like an alien species that visits the planet.
Yes. I was just thinking that the other day. I was like, it's so dehumanizing. It is as though, or like a god. You know, I mean, so one idea is that people are actually swapping themselves in for gods, and they're playing with human life. I mean, that's, you know, trying to change somebody's sex, or, you know, trying to protect people from, you know, laws, trying to have different laws for different groups of people. I mean, these are, this is a kind of, it's a loss of boundaries. This is a pattern of civilizations when they're just breaking down. And so the question is sort of, are we doomed? Are we resigned to that? Are we doomed to the civilization breaking down, or is there a better outcome? I like to look at places like the Netherlands. The Netherlands, it's pretty functioning. I mean, they've got some internal conflicts, and we were talking about the farmers before, but I mean, there aren't open air drug scenes. They did have that actually in the 80s and 90s. They shut them down. But it's you visit Amsterdam and you're kind of like, why can't we have this? You know, why can't we? I mean, wealthy, but without having lost, you know, I asked them about the opioid. How come you didn't have an opioid epidemic? Because we just felt like it was okay for people to experience some pain. I mean, a very important part of that, which was like, we don't want you to have any pain. Well, I don't know, you just had back surgery. I think you're going to have a little bit of pain. And then there's a risk of addiction. So you're not going to overprescribe meds. There was a kind of a core inner fiber there with the Dutch that they were the richest, one of the first civilizations in Europe after Spain. And
capitalism is born in Holland, basically, and the Scottish Enlightenment, adjacent to it, and
they were so rich that there's a famous book called The Embarrassment of Riches, where they were so rich that it was embarrassing to the Dutch. Obviously, they're now just a kind of, not to be mean about it, but they're not a particularly relevant country in the world anymore. They're not even Germany or France, but yet things are working. And so I do think there is a way. I think now it's a little different for the United States because we are still the global hegemon. We're still the greatest country in the world. There's just no question that we're at the center of Western civilization. So I do think, hopefully we're in for a period of some political change, but I think if it's not accompanied by the cultural changes that we're talking about, the changes to parenting culture, the changes to mentality and attitude and what gets taught in the schools, then I don't think it'll matter.
I think that there's something interesting in looking to the Dutch, and I would also say to Denmark and the Scandinavian countries, and that in my documentary The Pursuit with Arthur Brooks, we actually went to Denmark and we talked to a bunch of folks, and because
who were leaving the strollers outside the restaurant,
right? So we're doing these things, and the Danes actually do a lot of stuff like that in their in education. It's very normal. Finland, which many progressives love to tout as this wonder, like that's what we need. We need to pay teachers more. It's like, well, yes, they pay them more, but your math teacher has a PhD in math, and it's actually really, really hard to do.
Right.
Like, so it isn't like, oh, you've got a degree in nonsense, and then you're protected by teachers' unions that are basically like structurally corrupt. It's like there's this selective let's take from these things. It's hard to escape that those are very genetically and culturally homogenous societies. And so the Hygge and the Jantala, the trust.
Right.
Yeah, because half of your friends' names are Sven. So you trust Sven. You trust the Sven you don't know because he probably is your cousin.
Right.
And I don't mean that like they literally are genetically way closer to each other.
Right.
So they're kind of relying on an older, deeper, reptilian, tribal loyalty, solidarity thing.
Yeah.
Which means they have high degrees of trust. They have lowered amounts of like liability as a result. They have less lawsuits. There's like a bunch of other stuff that like they have lower transaction costs on things that we will never have.
The judicial system is more collaborative, less antagonistic between prosecutors and defendants. The American system is different, and I think that is very important to keep in mind. And, I think we're also able to handle the immigration and assimilation question much better than the Europeans are. They're terrible at
it's breaking. I mean, you
Yeah.
talk about the Dutch and you talk about what's happening politically there. It's not exactly like they're all super stoked about what's going on in their country.
It's a huge, huge crisis. So we're much better. I mean, if you kind of go, what do we have here? I mean, look, we're a continental-sized country, 2 oceans on both sides, zero chance of any real military, threat. Abundant natural resources. I mean, just abundant. And we have had a stoic, a semi-stoic culture for a long time. We've also had an anti-racist, actually a truly anti-racialist, non-racialist, assimilationist program. And, the woke left has been trying to attack it. I mean, I remember when they tried to get rid of the English-only education, which is known as teaching English to immigrants for a while. They thought that somehow it would be better. The kids didn't learn English. They had to get rid of it. So if I had to bet on something, I would bank on American pragmatism. It's also the only philosophical tradition that we invented is pragmatism, and it comes, it's John Dewey and Peirce and all these guys. We're practical people. We're affiliative, voluntary associations type people. We are bootstrap people, I think, at our core, and we're just having to we're going to have to slough off this awful woke radical left dehumanizing overlay that's been put on top of us. Again, I think it'll happen to some extent politically, but it's got to be matched by this cultural program to get back to the American creed, which is, it's individual liberty. It's like our best attribute. It's free enterprise. It's free speech. There's some things we have to work on, repatriating some of our industries, improving the schools. I mean, I think for most of our adult lives, we heard Democrats talk about improving schools. That's all stopped. I mean, now it's 25 to 30% rates of chronic absenteeism. And yes, COVID made it worse, but it was going in the wrong direction before that. Student performance is going down on every category for every group. So clearly it's not working, and so there needs to be some significant cultural course correction there for it to work. Because I think once you do get it to work, I'm sure if Trump is elected, we're going to end up expelling a fair number of migrants, but we're going to keep a bunch of good ones too. They're going to keep the ones that are on board with the American creed. And I do think there's a chance for us to get back to growth. That is ultimately what America has been able to do, is this thing of a degrowth, declining population. As long as our domestic populations aren't going to be reproducing at 2.1, we are going to need immigrants. And so I think being able to answer that immigration challenge with those educational solutions, and other things is going to be really the key to our rejuvenation.
If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.